We are glad to have our guests with us. We're going to spend a minute or two with Bruce because we didn't have the chance for any questions and answers in this kind of setting. And then we're going to pull Aisha into the conversation and see what she has to share. And again, we want all of you to speak up and be part of it.
But we have one more quiz, right? In order to know a little bit more about Bruce, we're going to ask those same questions as we did this morning. We are playing one truth and two lies and what are we playing?
Two
truths and a lie. So what we want you to do is to figure out which one is the lie. Which one is the lie? So going to menti.com, vote for, do you think Bruce herds cattle on horseback?
Absolutely. I believe that to be true.
Used to race streetcars.
I believe that to be completely true.
Played trumpet for 10 years. Which one is the lie? You know what? How about if we bring Bruce in to tell us what the real answer is?
It's interesting when people answer what they think about you. So I do not herd cattle. For those of you that know me, I am like city kid total. Yeah, in all seriousness, I'm surprised I'm still alive. I used to race. This is not a good thing at all. I used to race like in neighborhoods. It was awful. I'm terrible. And I had my license suspended when I was younger because I got busted. Fortunately, it's one of those things where I actually could have got arrested for felony reckless driving, but the police, for whatever reason, didn't. They made it that I got a misdemeanor. And I mean, it's one of those moments that I remember on my own journey around justice, realizing where privilege and things start to play into it, because it's one of those moments that could have shifted the way my entire life went. But yeah, I did not make some good choices when I was a teenager. There you go. There's a little bit about Bruce.
Nice. Well, let me just share that the one about herding cattle on horseback really is one of the fun facts that one of our other either preachers or plenary leaders have submitted for their fun facts. So you'll have to stay tuned for later in the week to figure out which of our preachers or plenary leaders can herd cattle on horseback.
Hey, Bruce, talk to us just a little bit. This isn't where we were going to go, but the whole point is to make it casual, right? Mm-hmm. How did your parents handle that? How did that look? You know, we're dealing with 1,000 people who are part of faith formation. They're educators, they're teachers, they're people who care for other people's kids. How did your parents handle that situation, and how did that affect you?
I will say, fortunately, my stepfather was a calming influence on my mother. I mean, pretty angry and justifiably so. I can't imagine if that were to happen at this point with any of my kids. Also, not surprising. You know, it was one of those that it wasn't as a matter of like, not my kid wouldn't be doing that. They were probably like, oh, yep, that's definitely what Bruce was doing. So I think, you know, there were certainly some consequences. And I was actually starting to kind of shift out of that world and out of that life a little bit. And so I think it was a wake-up call for me to have to go to court and have to be in that setting and have to talk in front of a judge and get the whole experience. And it really was a moment for me. Now I will say my once the initial kind of anger from my mother was done, she was there with me through the whole thing and told everybody. I mean, that was one of the other things. Like in my family is pretty tight and we're all up in each other's business, good and bad. And so, you know, you kind of just know that everybody's going to know within the next hour. Everybody knows that Bruce was in some hot water. So there was a communal part to it that I still appreciate. And we've raised our kids with that in good and bad, we're raised together. And there are times where you don't want people to take that baptismal vow so seriously, but there are times where that's what they do. We've all committed to raising our children. So in that regard, I think my mom leaned into other people to help as she was trying to figure out how to react in a way that was helpful to my upbringing, because it's certainly the initial. My mom was pretty angry. Again, understandably so.
Yeah, I would agree. Probably understandably so. So this is not this is the 1 second question, but I have to ask, what kind of car were you racing?
A Toyota Celica. My stepfather, for some unknown reason, let me have his Toyota Celica when he married my mother. So that's the first lesson: is none of my kids have gotten sports cars for their first cars. But yeah, it was, again, not good choices growing up.
Well, we've got a couple questions that Anne's
Sure.
going to hit you with, and then we're going to invite participants to actually voice their own questions in a minute. But we're going to start with something that Anne's got.
Yeah, so one of the questions, Bruce, that came in earlier is, what do you see are some of the real differences between hybrid and streaming?
Yeah, thank you. That is a really good question. And I want to reiterate over and over again that there is no value placed upon either. It is not as if we're trying to get to hybrid as this ultimate experience, because it is not going to fit in every place. But I will say streaming also needs to not pretend that it's you're providing a same worship experience as the people who are in the physical setting, as if the ones that are sitting at home from wherever they're viewing, because a streaming experience is generally going to be driven around what's happening in the service, the physical service. So however you do movement, however you might do communion, however you might do laying on of hands, however you might do some of those things, how you integrate the online folks will be important. So for instance, I can envision in a hybrid experience, you might have a big screen up front with everybody's in the squares, like a big screen with every Zoom square filled up there, somebody controlling it to scroll it around. And when you do the laying out of hands, everybody on that screen has their hands up as part of a circle around people, as opposed to streaming where you might view them, you might just watch people putting their hands on somebody in the middle of the sanctuary, and you're watching that happen. And you might have your hands up, but you're not part of that circle. So there's those subtle kind of reminders that the centrality of worship in a streaming experience is the physical space. What we're trying to do with the hybrid experience is the physical space is just as valid as somebody else's couch or their car on the beach or their camper in Oregon or wherever people may be joining us. So we're really trying to take away this idea that the penultimate experience of our community is the physical location, because the draw to that is so strong. And again, at streaming, you could do some really creative things, I believe, like making sure that you have a tech deacon on all the chat rooms, so that if you're streaming to YouTube or to your website or to Facebook, that they're called out in the middle of worship to say, hey, are the prayers coming up from the Facebook? Are the prayers coming up from YouTube? And so you're kind of having some interaction. But it's not the same as if I have my laptop in front of me as I'm preaching and I'm watching the chat go, or I'm watching things happen, and I just call on somebody as I would call on a physical person. I could just call on a square that's sitting in front of me. So I think there are those subtle shifts in where are you centering the experience. And again, like one of the things that I'll do is I will not preach from the sanctuary every time. I will preach from right here at least half the time. So that will create this setting that the remote experience again is you're basically having the same experience either way. So that would be the main difference, is that you're centered on your physical location, or your space, the physical location is just one of many seats from which people are experiencing worship.
Great.
Excellent. Great thoughts. One quick follow-up on that. Doesn't that, I think about big screens and stuff like that. How does that work in a smaller setting, in a less wealthy church?
Yeah. So I will say one thing is stuff is not as expensive as it used to be. I mean, you can now get a full chalice wide big old screen for a couple $100 on Amazon or some other place. Like things are starting to come down now, so that you're not like when our first conversation in our church, they were saying, is it going to like cancel out all of our reserves? And I'm like, No, like, you could do multiple scales of things. So even if it was just one projector and like, so let's say a 6 by 8 screen, that might fit in a smaller setting. The other thing that I think folks have to realize is that um, you might be able to meet in different locations when this all settles out. It's not as if on a certain day your sanctuary is going to be full. Like, it's going to take a while before people start coming in, the numbers that you're really going to have to fill a large space. So you could begin to think creatively about, well, what about a chapel or a smaller room that we might have? So a small screen won't look so small. You can have it actually sitting in a fellowship hall or another gathering space. If you have, I suspect we worship at about a little over 100 people. I suspect that we're going to get 20 when we start in person, and everybody else is going to be online. So that we'll probably think about just being in our chapel, like, and not even using our sanctuary, because that allows us to create. I think it'll be easier to create some hybrid space that way. Now, eventually, we may build that back up. So I think there are options to do this without it being a lot of costing a lot of money. Again, screens are not as expensive as they used to be. Projectors have come way down, and most of us don't need projectors that are going to now go from one side of the sanctuary to the other. You can find more affordable ones that will back project. So there are some more options. The other piece that I would say, folks, about the money is, if your judicatories are not putting together money for grants, I think your presbyteries, if you're a Presbyterian, aren't doing you service. I mean, I think most presbyteries now are providing some kind of funds for churches to begin to upgrade their technology. And I think you could do a system for $1,000. Like, you could figure out a way to do it for $1,000. And when you look at most of our budgets, I mean, that certainly a lot for some places, but partner with another congregation. I mean, I feel like one of our first reactions to the technology question is it's going to cost too much. And I don't think it has to. It certainly can, but I don't think it has to be the barrier.
Amazing. Hey, Aisha, are you there?
I'm right here.
Wonderful. I'm just curious, from your perspective, having Bruce talk about this new frontier and going a different way, to a hybrid way of doing ministry. Speak to me how you think that's going to work within your congregation, within your community, in your presbyteries.
Well, Bruce is our kickoff guest preacher for our virtual and vital presbytery. So he's speaking my language. I didn't want him to tell y'all as much as he told you all, because he's talking to us in February. So some of my people are already excited. It just, I get to watch colleagues like Bruce and other colleagues who have caught on that this hybrid thing, this both and thinking, which is what it means to be the church in this new way. And so I'm right. I applaud it. I celebrate it. I glean from it. I mean, this is, for me, when he talks to me, he's preaching to the choir. And so everything that he talks about, our presbytery applied for a PDA grant and was able to give out, $35,000 to 35 churches, $1,000 a piece, so that they could do those upgrades. So, I mean, I'm watching. When I keep saying people are already doing it, like, I'm watching people do it who would have never imagined. The other thing too is, some of these congregations have people who are really good at tech, but because there was never like a tech subcommittee, or there was never any vision around tech, they just kind of sat on their hands and sat on their gifts. There's a whole other aspect of hybrid worship where there are people who have these gifts that can now come up and say, actually, I have all that equipment at home, and actually I do that for my job, or actually, I have a master's degree in this kind of work. And so I'm fascinated for how even more gifts are able to come up with the hybrid expression. So I'm all for it.
I am so glad you said that, because at my church, what we have are two amazing college students who have a passion for this. And they came in, and if you have the heart to be open to voices who are newer to the game, you might be shocked at what they can do in your community. And so my congregation has seen this hybrid sense take place with high school students and college students. And it is really a great way to engage kids, because we think about, they're always on their computer or their iPad or whatever, and why do they have to do that? Let's change the question. How can we take their passion for something like that and say, what could that teach us? What could that add to our church's ministry? I love it.
Yeah, and one of the questions that came in from a participant is worship the only place where hybrid is possible? So talk to us about youth events and committee meetings, fellowship events. How can all of those things, different things, go hybrid?
I'll go. I mean, I think that has changed for everybody. I mean, I think there's, if that hasn't shifted the way you're already meeting, I don't think there's any amount of trying to convince people now. If folks have not been convinced by this point, either we have not done it well so that it's been a good experience and that may need to shift, or it's, I don't want to be pessimist, or it's just not, if it hasn't worked at this point for the meetings piece, I'm not sure you're going to get there. I just feel like this was an ideal time to do that. I think worship is certainly different. I think that there's something about that connection that's different. But our session, I mean, we basically just decided we're not going to meet in person anymore. I mean, it was because folks are like, this is great. I'm not driving at night. I'm not spending 3 hours, getting there, getting into the room, getting back to my car, driving home. It's like 2 hours. And I have to get kind of dressed. And I mean, I think it's that part has, because we've had good experiences with it. It hasn't felt like we have to do this. We're trying to shift it into, we get to meet this way. We get to bring people in who otherwise wouldn't be part of these meetings. So I think that decision about, are you going to invite people in who otherwise wouldn't be part of your community, to take that invitation really seriously? Because if you invite that person who's reconnected with you because they haven't been able to find a place where they are that matches where they need to be theologically or ideologically or whatever, and you're inviting them back into engage in the community, or somebody new has found you, and then you kind of flip the game on them in 6 months, I think you end up burning people, right? If you say we're hybrid now, and then all of a sudden you're engaged, but now we're not going to do that anymore, or you have to now show up here all the time, I think that's unfair. So I think that at this point, having all of those meetings and things, just enjoy them. I just feel like it's such an enjoyable experience if we do them well. That said, everybody needs to give themselves a break if they don't run these meetings well, because this is not a muscle that most people were utilizing before pandemic. I think pastors were just arrogant enough to think we can do everything, and churches unfortunately think and expect that we can do everything. And I think long term, we're going to have some grace with ourselves about learning how to moderate meetings in Zoom versus moderating meetings in person. And there are some distinct things you can do differently that are helpful. I have a new book coming out in March, and I do a whole chapter on how kindness exhibits itself in the middle of meetings. And some of that is online, and how we honor human complexity in the middle of online gatherings, because I think that's a piece. So subtle little plug for a book, but I do think that there's all this great opportunity to be able to do. I want to make one little plug too. I'm going to put in the chat, there's a lot of people asking specific questions about stuff. And because you all are my people, if you want to grab 30 minutes of Zoom time with me, this is no charge. This is not like, you're not getting coaching fee. I just put a link in the chat. You just have to go on, click on that, and it'll just grab a half an hour on my calendar. And I'm just offering that to who's ever in this group right now. If you just want to go in, because there's some specific questions about a session or some things that we're not going to get to, feel free to use that, grab some time on my calendar in the next couple of months. And I would love to sit down and talk more with folks. I only want us to succeed at this. The more congregations and pastoral leaders and educators succeed, the better and more easily we're all going to adapt to this.
What could?
There you go.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah. So there's always a big question, Bruce, for involving children in worship. So thoughts is hybrid or ways to involve children in worship?
Yeah, so I this is not my I'm big into strengths, and I do Clifton strengths, where meaning that know what you're really good at and realize what maybe are stretches for you. And children's ministry, even in person or online, is not in my wheelhouse. That is not part of my kind of space. And so I do not try to pretend that I know how to do that. I have friends, and you have people that are speaking at this event who are the ones that I call to come talk to my folks. Like Amy Kim, I brought her into our church. I'm like, help us, dear Lord, talk about how to do children and youth. And so I have no shame in saying, one, our church doesn't have any kids at this point, and so we haven't had to worry about it. But there are some technical things around safety and security and things that you shift and change, certainly. But the how we do that well, there are simply just people that are much better at that, and who I would call and talk with me and our folks before we really started to engage that work. So I'm not going to even try to fake an answer for you.
But thanks for that lead in, Bruce. Since Amy Kim is our plenary leader on Saturday, we will look forward to the message that she brings us. So thanks a lot there. So let me switch it then over to how do we keep our minds and hearts focused on justice in a rapidly evolving society, more focused on technology?
If I can,
Please.
I think one of the things that's been very interesting about this awakening or awareness around justice, that a lot of it was because of what has been filmed and what has been documented in digital space that fanned the flame for people to say things have to be different. We have to do something. We cannot keep silent. We have to get in the street. We have to use our resources. We have to use our voice. So there is a really deep tie between digital space and justice. And so just like this is a platform for evangelism, for discipleship, it is also a platform at lightning speed that you can utilize your gifts and your influence for positive change or not so positive. And so I've seen, the same way I've seen people do worship and Bible studies, these same people are doing dismantling racism workshops and book studies, relationships across racial divides, and saying, how can we do this work together? They're literally doing these things in digital space. So I'm not sure that it really is much difference. It's just really content and focal point in saying, what are the actionable items or steps that we can take to do that? And we have these resources in our denomination and really right at our fingertips. So to me, it's just a continued extension of our discipleship.
Right. Aisha, we can't thank you enough for saying that. You've been part of the planning team for our worship services, so you know what's coming tomorrow. And that is as good of a lead as we could ever hope for saying that tomorrow will be a great time for us to dive even deeper into that. We want to pause for a minute. Ann and I have tried to answer some questions that we've seen and people have sent in, but we want to invite all of the people who are on the call with us. If you would just raise your hand, the friends, the G&T friends, are going to choose a couple of you and put you on screen, and we'll let you ask your questions to Aisha and Bruce. Somebody will have to be brave and ask the question.
It looks like you've got some hands up.
Great. Who's first up? Go for it. You're on.
I'm Audrey from Westminster, South Carolina. And my question is for Aisha, because you really spoke to me talking about how what was filmed kind of opened people's eyes. I saw that happen in my very rural, very small, predominantly white church. So I'm wondering, as the leader of the presbytery there in Atlanta, did you see something similar? And if so, were there some actions that happened that were inspiring or could inspire us?
I think what I saw again was people utilizing language, or people that are kind of more in rural areas, or one of my pastors every week did a YouTube thing, did like a YouTube commentary, and was trying to explain Black Lives Matter, and had all these T-shirts on and would say, I understand why different lives matter. And he sent it to me, and I said, I really wish you had a Black Lives Matter T-shirt underneath, not because I think you need to be all about that, but just as an example to say, this is how people are expressing themselves. So he redid the video, and I was like, man, like that's crazy. Like, people who would not normally utilize this language or feel the boldness or the courage to speak out were doing so. One of our pastors, their church would just have little signs up to say, like, we care about justice, we care about Black people. Some folks honked, some folks gave other signals that are not so affirming, but they still stood, and he made cartoons about it, right? So like, people are really doing actionable things. And my other hope for them too is to dig deeper in the history, right? That there's a history, there's a lineage to this level of brokenness. And if one group is disenfranchised, what are the other groups? What about the poor? What about people who don't have access, to medical needs? So I'm watching this sort of breaking of the scales from their eyes, right? Folks are doing podcasts. There are real tangible things that folks are doing in this presbytery that I would never have imagined would talk about this in this way. And there's just really a breaking in history and in time right now. People are responding in really powerful ways. I hope I answered that right.
You answer it beautifully. Thank you for the question. What else do we have out there? Josh?
Well, my hand's raised, and I want to know what you're reading, or what music you're listening to, what books you're listening to that are both feeding your soul, keeping you playful, keeping you engaged.
Is this to me or Bruce or both? Because I'm ready to
both, if possible.
I'm ready to pre-order In Defense of Kindness, coming out March 2021. That's what I'm getting ready for.
Of course.
All right. Bruce, you go.
Yeah. What am I reading? What am I listening to? So I bought a turntable. So I used to DJ in high school. So I raced cars and DJ'd. So I was kind of a walking stereotype of I don't know what that is. But anyway, and at one point I gave away all my records to people. And then I finally got a new turntable. And so I've been listening to a lot of old hip hop and actually pre-hip hop. So I'm like Lakeside, Daz Band, Cameo, like that's my people. And so I found a bunch of those records. I've just been playing those on a loop, and my kid's like, what are you listening to? And I'm like, good music. This is like real music. So so that's what I've been doing. I've also been doing a lot of listening on I use a lot of Audible. The one book that I just listened to is called The Resistors by Gish Jen. Really interesting pre-future or near future kind of I don't even know how to explain it, but if you like I can't even explain it really. It's like baseball, but it's future apocalyptic dystopian justice stuff. Super entertaining, good, solid. You're not going to have nightmares, but it'll keep you listening. So that's The Resistors. And you actually, Gish will interact with you on Facebook. So if you were to put something in there, she'll like, hey, thanks for reading. So that one. And I'm reading another one called Nothing to See Here, which is a really funky book. I try, like, there's so much out there that's so good right now and intense. I've intentionally been reading things not connected directly to any of the work that I'm doing. And trying to really escape out of that space, because I have a big stack of stuff that I certainly want to read, but I'll make one pitch though. This is a great book called Rally: Communal Prayers for Lovers of Jesus and Justice. We're using this for Lent, and it's a great book. Whitney Lee is the one who. Let me get that screen there. So it's called Rally communal prayers for lovers of Jesus and justice. And it's just, I think it's about 52. Yeah, it's 52 reflections and litanies. And we're using this as our Lenten prayer devotional for Lent. And it's really good. Like if you want to dive into justice issues and have liturgy written, this isn't just like, oh, let us seek justice, which is great. This is, what about capital punishment? What about, I mean, this is like really just wonderful, feeds the soul. So that's one of the things I would suggest.
Awesome. Aisha, you didn't mention any music. What are you listening to?
I was just going to say, Bruce, we probably are related on my mother's cousin's side. But I just bought vinyl. I think there is a spiritual discipline to vinyl. So I just picked up that classic Duke Ellington, of which my son is named, and John Coltrane. You've got it. So any classic jazz or, you know, a little bit of R&B. I've got like maybe 2 hip hop, Little Diggable playing this little Tribe Called Quest because I'm that kind of old. I think the other thing is just nature. Like I just rearranged my room so I could just wake up and just look at the trees and the sun, and the sky this morning was just beautiful orange before it turned to the full light. So just really try to reconnect with nature. A couple books that I kind of have on that shelf. Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Water Dancer. If you've not read it, I would encourage you to, I'm right in the middle of it, but it's just beautiful imagery about freedom and this movement off of the plantation. And if you haven't gotten it, please get that. Another book that is in the queue for me is David Kessler's Finding Meaning. He did a podcast with Brene Brown and has added a 6th stage to grief called Finding Meaning. And so I'm really fascinated as we talk about this season, what will grief and resilience look like? So those are the 2 I'm dealing with right now, in between vinyl and looking out of the window.
Okay, I know you guys, they're not going to appreciate this. You need to send us an email with all of those books, because Ann and I are not at our computers, so we can get the names of them, and we'll try to throw them on the website so everybody can see what you're reading and connect with that. We're wondering, is there one or two more questions? Josh, are we good?
I think so.
Awesome. Aisha, I guess the one thing I've been kind of wondering about that I have to ask myself, do you have some story you need to share with us that I'm positive you do about a sequence, bumblebee something?
A little ballet outfit.
Yeah, sure. So when I was a wee one for Christ, my mother signed me up for ballet lessons. I do not, in my mind, have the body type for that, but she thought that would be good. You know, nice African-American dance company. And I did that for about 9 months. And all I remember is that I had this little bumblebee costume with like sequins on it, and it had wings that were sort of tie-dyed. And so I just remember just going across the stage. I said, kind of think of Blind Melon's No Rain video, but with the little chocolate character and the bumblebees and the thing. So that's my one ever dance recital. She should have put me in the African dance class across the way, but you know, no fault of her own.
I think I would have paid a lot to see that. That would have been amazing. And all I can see, to be honest, is beautiful lipstick, the great hair, and that confidence just owning the stage. That is right.
Yeah.
That is right. Aisha and Bruce, we are just so grateful for the authentic way in which you have approached this and sharing extra time with us. And so we are very grateful.